Today we're going to talk about a couple of new religions. One of them is one of the older new religions. The other is one of the newer new religions. Both of them are groups that have been making a lot of impact in the United States for quite some time, and indeed around the world. The first group that I would like to discuss with you for a short period of time this morning, it doesn't matter.
Just start over.
Okay, take two. In this session, I would like to talk to you about a couple of new religions that have made a lot of impact in the United States and indeed around the world. The first falls into the category of new religions, but it's one of the older ones. The second is one of the newer new religions. And we'll be talking about the impact that each has had and what makes them unique. The first group I'd like to discuss with you is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the group that is often referred to as the Mormons. The group itself often historically has referred themselves to themselves as the Mormons. In recent years, they have tried to veer away from that and have even suggested that if you want to shorten their name from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that you can simply call them the Church of Jesus Christ and simply leave off the Latter-day Saints. For purposes of this lecture, we will refer to them as the LDS, Latter-day Saints, and probably occasionally I will lapse into Mormons. The Latter-day Saints group was founded by a man named Joseph Smith, Jr., who was born in 1805 in upstate New York, an area that was called the Burned Over District, because there had been so many religious groups that had been set aflame there, and they had had revivals, and they had burned across that part of the state and then burned back the other way. And young Joseph Smith famously has said that in the town where he lived, Palmyra, New York, there was a center crossroads with a different church, a different Christian denomination on each corner, and he was hard-pressed to figure out which one of those was the right way. So he took it upon himself, as he grew older, to go out into the woods and spend time in meditation. And as his story goes, he was meditating in the woods one day when suddenly in dazzling light there appeared to him God and Jesus Christ, the figures from Christianity, who told him that he was absolutely correct not to buy into any of these existing denominations because all of them were in error, and that if he were patient and he kept pursuing the truth, that they would show him the truth. Eventually, after a period of visitations by various heavenly beings over a long period of time, he was led to a hill called the Hill Cumorah. And there, first he was shown, and then eventually he was given permission to take from that hill some gold tablets. And these gold tablets were kind of packaged in a box, along with some stones, which the angel, who by this time was directing his efforts, told him were the Urim and Thummim of ancient Israel. These are found in the Hebrew scriptures. They're described as some sort of devices which were used to help understand God's will in a given situation. Now the Urim and Thummim, as Joseph Smith found them, were a pair of stones that somehow he affixed into frames and placed them over his face like glasses. He then proceeded over time, again, through divine intervention, according to his own accounts, and through these special seeing stones, to interpret the language of the gold tablets, which he said was written in Reformed Egyptian. He translated those into 17th century English. Now do keep in mind he's living in the 19th century, but as he dictated the words and they were written down by some of his friends, he went behind a screen to do this interpretive work, and they wrote it down. And what was produced through the interpretation, the translation of these gold tablets, has come to us as the Book of Mormon. The book was published in 1830, and it proclaims itself to be another testament of Jesus Christ. Now, this book tells a whole different story than what Christians have in the New Testament or what Jews have in the Torah. The Book of Mormon tells the story of two Jewish tribes who during the time of all the conflict that we refer to as Old Testament times, when people were being taken away as captives and then sometimes returned to the land, these two tribes simply left the fracas there and migrated using boats to the New World. They came here, they established a wonderful civilization, they built cities, they had technological innovations, all sorts of things happened. But they did maintain, to varying levels, their Judaism, their commitment to the God of Israel, their practice of the ancient Jewish ceremonies, and so on. However, over time, one of the tribes tended to prosper spiritually, shall we say, the other one declined. The Book of Mormon furthermore proclaims that after his resurrection in Israel, Jesus came to America, which, of course, this is long before it was America. 2,000 years ago, Jesus came, he appeared to these Nephites and Lamanites, he proclaimed his additional revelation, he spent some time with them teaching his sayings, similar things, though quite a bit of additional material than is recorded in the Christian New Testament, and then he ascended on into heaven. Well, as time went by, the two tribes warred with one another. And the believing tribe was the minority, the tribe that accepted both their Jewish heritage and accepted the teachings of Jesus. Eventually, through many rounds of war, the believing tribe was minimized down to two individuals, an elder named Mormon and his son Moroni. And Mormon then dictated to Moroni all the oral lore, the previously oral lore of their tribe. They wrote it down on gold tablets in the Reformed Egyptian language. They managed to bury them in the hill before both of them were killed. The Book of Mormon further goes on to say that the Christianity that was practiced, I'm sorry, not the Book of Mormon, Mormonism believes that the Christianity practiced in Judea, that where the New Testament was written, they soon lost many of the teachings of Jesus. And that Christianity descended from the time of the apostles into just a morass of error. They call this Babylon, that the whole church was taken captive, philosophically, spiritually speaking, by Babylon. And so Joseph Smith then was given this task of restoring the original church. Some of the things that they practiced early on, he reconstituted the original Hebrew priesthood according to their ideas. They restored the temple rituals and indeed the very idea of the temple. Originally they started with one temple, and they proclaimed that the temple would be built in Independence, Missouri. That has still never quite resulted, at least in the LDS branch of this group. They have now planted many temples around the world, but still envision an idealized temple in a central location, and I believe they still regard that ideal location would be Independence. They renewed the idea of a totally God-directed civilization. The Book of Mormon does not just give advice about how one would spend eternity comfortably. The Book of Mormon gives directions about how cities are to be built and laid out, how economies are to be run. It gives ideas about what government ought to look like and how laws ought to be expressed. And so wherever Mormonism has been planted, it has sought to totally revise the culture of that particular area in particular ways. Other unique ideas of Mormonism include the idea of eternal progression. Mormons believe, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes, that humans pre-exist, or shall we say human souls pre-exist their birth on earth. That individuals are actually born to spirit parents, to the God of that particular universe and one of his spiritual wives. Those spiritual children then are born into earthly bodies through the intercourse of a man and a woman here. And they then have their time on earth to make it through particular levels. But just because they cease this worldly existence does not mean that their spiritual progress is stopped or blocked. They believe that there is room for much, much further progression in the eternal realms. They believe that there's not just heaven or hell, but actually 3 fates beyond death, and that only the very, very wicked go to anything that looks like punishment, but other people have the opportunity for renewal and for further development beyond death. They believe, indeed, that humans can make the choice to follow Mormonism in the supernatural realm that lies beyond this world. However, they do believe that bodies still must be baptized in water, and a soul who is existing in an eternal realm beyond this world cannot be baptized. And so they have a very unique practice called baptism for the dead, in which generally young Mormons go and do what's called temple work, and they stand in for various people who've passed on and are baptized in their names, just in the event that those people have made a profession of faith in the other world. They can be baptized by proxy, and the work that these people do through baptism then is attributed to the spirits living in the other realm. A controversial doctrine that some LDS members today deny, but it is well attested in their historical documents, is that the God of this universe at one point was a human, and that people who are humans now, or at least males who are human now, have the potential of becoming gods on their own, and ultimately being the God of some sort of civilization, some sort of universe. Though earthly polygamy was indeed stopped by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the late 1800s, spiritual polygamy is still a basic tenet of the faith, that males should spiritually marry as many women as possible, so that in the worlds to come they will have adequate mothers for the spirit children. Mormons indeed believe that families are forever. And when I have speakers from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints come into my classes, that's one of the things that they always take great pains to emphasize, that they have 2 big values. One of them is family, the other is Jesus Christ. And they tend to talk about them both with great intensity and affection. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was founded in 1830 in upstate New York. Joseph Smith Jr.'s family and friends were his first converts. But over in Ohio, a guy named Sidney Rigdon, who is the minister of a church there, heard about what Joseph Smith was doing, liked his ideas, and basically offered his whole church, offered that his whole congregation would join up with Joseph Smith. And so Smith and his family, not having a big financial stake where they were, moved to Kirtland, Ohio. And Kirtland is where the first opportunity was for Joseph Smith to lay out a town, to set up an economy, and to demonstrate what Mormonism really should look like. They moved in, they got things going, but a few years later, due to an economic crunch, an economic crisis, and again, the church was heavily involved with banking and so on, they were forced to kind of shut down their system there. They had already begun to send out missionaries, especially to the West, and people had come back with glowing reports of a place called Independence, Missouri. So in 1834, Joseph Smith went there and joined some LDS members who were already there. And they came in and once again began to set up their idealized community, how the streets should be laid out, how the government should be run, how a militia should be created. Well, there were already people in Independence, Missouri, and they didn't like the intrusion of these strangers. Oh, Joseph Smith Jr. also, as he traveled around, believed that this was indeed a wonderful land and proclaimed that far west Missouri, which is a little bit north of Kansas City, was where the original Garden of Eden had been, and that God had simply called his people back to the place of their creation. Well, again, a lot of the people there did not like the LDS people coming in and trying to impose their ideas on others, and so a lot of violence broke out. The Mormons actually created their own kind of militia group called the Danites to fight off the people who were harassing them. Eventually there was enough armed conflict that the governor of the state sent in some troops. There was conflict with them. And a remarkable thing took place. The Missouri governor of the time repealed the part of the law against murder that would apply to Mormons. He basically said that if you kill a Mormon, you are not committing murder. So the Mormons fled the state. They were given a certain amount of time to get out. They went to Nauvoo, Illinois, and set up a town there in 1839. Same routine, laid out the streets. They began to build their religious facilities there. Things were actually going pretty well there. They had a number of new converts, and the economy was booming. They created their own militia. Joseph Smith Jr. announced that he was going to run for governor of the state of state of Illinois. Well, a nearby publisher did not like those words. He did not like the Latter-day Saints, and he printed some pretty hostile things towards the Mormons. The rumor is that it was Mormons who then broke into his place and trashed his printing press. When word of this got out, the existing governor of Illinois, sent in troops to arrest Joseph Smith Jr., who then fled over into Iowa with his brother. Eventually, kind of a truce was negotiated. But when Joseph Smith Jr. came back, he was arrested. He was put in jail in Carthage, Illinois. And there, an angry mob broke in and dragged him out, though not without a fight. Somehow or another, Joseph Smith Jr. and his brother Hiram and a couple of other guys in jail had managed to have weapons in the jail. There was a firefight, but ultimately Joseph and Hiram were killed. So once again, the utopian vision had found no solution there. So there was a big turmoil. Who's going to be the next leader? The majority of people thought that Brigham Young should be the next leader, who agreed to do so. There were some people who felt that Joseph Smith had made a pretty clear prediction that his son, Joseph Smith III, would actually be the leader, although having just seen his father killed, Joseph Smith III did not want anything to do with the group. Sidney Rigdon, remember him, he thought that he should be the next leader. And so after Joseph Smith Jr. was killed, there were already several splits happening. As noted, Brigham Young got the majority of the people. He led them west. They decided they wanted to get out of the reach of American judicial systems and so on, and so they went to this territory called Utah, where they did not intend to be a state. They did not necessarily intend to be connected to the United States, but rather they wanted to set up their own nation, which they called it Deseret, and they settled on the shores of the Great Salt Lake and started setting things up there. They did practice earthly polygamy for a time. When they finally did decide that it would be expedient to become a state, they had to renounce polygamy and did so, and the rest is history. They became part of the United States as a state, as Utah, and have since disseminated throughout the United States and throughout the world. Now, the dissidents who believed that Joseph Smith III should be the leader eventually wound their way back in independence. They became the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who just a few years back changed their name to the Community of Christ. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints promotes itself as being the fastest growing religion in the world today. And that may well be true. It's kind of hard to know because they do not keep very good statistics of people who are leaving the church at the same time. It is true that they are gaining rapidly. There are over 12 million of them in the world, approximately half of them in the United States. They have a very, very aggressive missionary program. If you know members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you've probably heard about their missionary program where 18-year-old boys, 19-year-old girls go off for 2 years for the guys, 18 months for the women, and they pay their own expenses to go someplace else in the world and spend that 18 months or 2 years as missionaries out every day. You've undoubtedly seen these folks on the streets, guys wearing the dark shirts and white dark pants, white shirts, dark ties, and name tags, and the women generally very conservatively dressed, going door to door, proclaiming to people the tenets of their faith. They have very, very rapidly been building temples around the world. And people have often asked, how can they afford to do that? Well, the LDS is the only religious institution of which I'm aware that has mandatory tithing that is actually backed up by people turning in their IRS forms to the church to demonstrate that they have indeed been adequately tithing. They are known to be a very, very wealthy church. In recent years, there have been a number of issues related to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith Jr. proclaimed that the whole church was Babylon except for his restoration. Throughout the years, they have often taught that all other Christian, so-called Christian denominations are totally out of order and do not know the truth. However, in the last couple of decades, from the 1990s on, they've been trying to position themselves as a Christian group that isn't necessarily hostile to everyone else. Whereas before they tended to say, we are Christian, but you are not. Now they're saying, oh, aren't we all Christians on this particular bus? And they've met some resistance with that from some people who say, many of your beliefs are not Orthodox Christianity. And they say, well, actually our Orthodox Christianity, you lost your orthodoxy back in the 1st or 2nd century. In 2008, Mitt Romney from Massachusetts made a bid to run for president of the United States, and his Mormonism was a huge issue in the electoral process. People wondering how his Mormon beliefs would impact his ability to be the president of the United States. Recently, as with historic Christianity, there have been many archaeological challenges and even DNA challenges to the history as it has been proclaimed by the Latter-day Saints. It has been impossible for them to verify the details of the Book of Mormon, or for that matter, even the general shapes of the Book of Mormon from American archaeology. Geography, history, they have all presented challenges to the LDS. However, they are known to be extremely nice people. They are known to be people who have good families. They're known to be people who have good values. And many people in America are looking for just those things. So again, back to the previous lecture, in a time of change, when traditional religious institutions have been eroded, when family structures have been somewhat challenged, when social values have been changing and scaring many people, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with its strong families, with its emphasis on health and emphasis on morality, its emphasis on clean living and so on, has appeared to be a welcome oasis for many people who have not found the answers they were seeking someplace else. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints represents one of the older new religions that we talk about in my new religions class. That's Religion 344 if you're looking for something to sign up for next. One of the newest new religions, and one that has certainly been in the news prominently, has been the Church of Scientology, or COS, but we'll probably just refer to it as Scientology throughout this part of the lecture. I do need to make a disclaimer at the very beginning. There are often groups with similar sounding names in religion in general who get confused for one another, and no place does that happen any more than the Church of Scientology as compared to the Church of Christ Scientist or the Christian Science Church. And the Christian Science Church is a church started in the late 19th century by a woman named Mary Baker Eddy, and her main tenet of faith was that thought precedes and creates reality. Therefore, what you decide, what you choose, will become reality. And there have been many conflicts in American culture about people who are ill or who appear to be ill to outsiders or who have broken legs or whatever, not being treated medically appropriately because they are Christian scientists who believe that it's a matter of the way you think. And if you think you are well, you will be well because you create reality. Now, that's another group I talk about in new religious movements, but that's not the same as Scientology. And interestingly, I was on a panel at Missouri State last year where they wanted a representative from Christian Science, and they flew someone in from California to be on this panel for about 50 students in the Student Union Theater. But they are so adamant about people proclaiming articulately that we are not Scientology that they flew somebody in all the way from California to proclaim that to the 50 students who were there for this little panel session. No, Scientology is something entirely different. Scientology, founded by L. Ron Hubbard, Lafayette Ron Hubbard, in Tilden, Nebraska in 1911. Hubbard is the founder, the magus, if you recall me using that term before. He passed away, we think, in 1986. There's actually quite a bit of controversy about his death that we don't have time to go into. L. Ron, as his followers tend to call him, grew up in Montana on his grandfather's farm. He told many different stories about his childhood, about travels to the east, about traveling with his father to exotic places of the world. His father, as far as we can tell, really was a naval officer. There are a few ways of really documenting many of his stories. It seems pretty accurate that eventually he wound up in Washington, D.C., graduated from high school there, attended 1 year of George Washington University. This is all taking place in the 1930s, late 20s, early 30s. He was an adventurous guy. He did an exploration trip of Central America. He learned to fly, he learned to sail, but he really, really liked to write. He served in the Navy during World War II, and according to his accounts, he was pronounced dead twice and was able to be resuscitated. He claims that it was during one of these near-death experiences that he received his mandate to do something that would change the world. He made a living throughout the 30s and 40s by writing science fiction. Lots and lots and lots of science fiction, although I was relatively recently surprised to find that he also wrote Western novels. I'd never come across any of those. He wrote a lot for the serialized magazines where there would be an installment every month. And he made a pretty decent living as a writer. He tried his hand at making a few films, never made anything that made it big time. But in 1950, he wrote a book in which he proclaimed that he had come to the real reason for mental distress and lack of personal fulfillment in the world. He published a book called Dianetics, and with great enthusiasm, he kind of presented it to the mental health community and said, look, I figured it out. We've been going about this the wrong direction. Here is the answer. And essentially, they laughed him off the stage. They ridiculed him. They said, this is worthless, this is absurd. And that created a feud with the psychiatric or mental health community that continues to this day. In 1952, Hubbard founded something called the Hubbard Foundation for Scientology. And in 1954, he actually started the Church of Scientology. He proclaimed that Dianetics gives the hidden source of all psychosomatic ills, and human aberrations has been discovered, and the skills have been developed for their invariable cure. Oh, that was bad. Let me say that again. In speaking of Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard said, the hidden source of all psychosomatic ills and human aberrations has been discovered, and skills have been developed for their invariable cure. This book, Dianetics, holds the key to everything that Scientologists believe. L. Ron, as I said, presented his ideas to the establishment, and they laughed him off the stage, and so L. Ron said, then I'll take them directly to the people. They have been doing that to this day. The book is still marketed extremely aggressively. You could go out to Barnes & Noble today and buy a copy of it there. They market it through late night TV. They market it through their website. They market it in every way they possibly can. And the church itself even buys back copies from bookstores around the world so that it can maintain its status as a bestseller year after year after year. Scientology believes or proclaims that people have two minds. They have the analytic mind, which is what we deal with day to day in figuring out what to have for lunch or when to stop and get fuel, and the reactive mind. The analytic mind is kind of how we go about our business. The reactive mind is what establishes how we feel, how we perceive things around us, who we actually are as individuals. Well, Scientologists believe that all human beings have had any number of shocks to their system in this and previous lives, which create what they call engrams. Engrams, E-N-G-R-A-M-S, are sort of blemishes on people's souls. These are in the reactive mind. They keep human beings from experiencing fulfillment. They keep them from experiencing peace and joy. However, the good news, according to Scientology, is that engrams can be eliminated. Seekers. And how do you become a seeker? Well, one of the most common ways is that they mail you, or you find online, or somebody perhaps even hands you on the street a personality inventory. You go through this, you respond to it, I believe it's 300 questions, very extensive. And after they analyze it, they tell you that yes, you have a number of engrams that they can help you with. So you go to see an auditor. And an auditor is sort of like a counselor. You sit in a chair, they sit in a chair. But they use a device called an e-meter. It's kind of a rudimentary lie detector where you have these canisters you hold in each hand, and the auditor sits there watching the dial, and the auditor asks you a series of questions. And there are various levels of auditing that focus on different elements of your personality and your life. And whenever the needle jumps and shows that there's an issue there, oh, you stop there, they mark it down. And the goal is, through many sessions, and these are not free sessions, you buy blocks of sessions that you can go to, and through any number of these sessions, you're supposed to come to a point where they can talk about anything with you, and the needle will never move. At that point, you are declared to be clear. Well, it's a very expensive process, and what happens if somebody can't afford it? Well, good news, you can go to work for the church. They have a handy little contract that you can fill out, and by going to work for the church, working at one of their headquarters or recruiting new members or doing any number of other things, you can work off your auditing. Now, once you are clear, that's when the real fun begins, because you are capable of more than just being clear. Scientologists believe, because L. Ron Hubbard taught, that in the beginning there was one deity over the universe named Xenu, spelled with an X, not with a Z. And Xenu created many other gods, billions and billions of gods, hundreds of billions of gods. And these other gods essentially got bored. And so they created matter, energy, space, and time, or MEST, as Scientologists call it, kind of to keep occupied. And they started playing around, they started having dramas and all these sorts of things. And it frankly made Xenu sick. So eventually he captured all the other gods, he bundled them up, stuffed them in volcanoes, and detonated nuclear devices to destroy them. But he miscalculated. They could not be destroyed, they could simply be kind of atomized. And so the bits and pieces of gods that were exploded from those volcanic explosions, those nuclear volcanic explosions, have become some of the burdens that human beings have to deal with, in addition to our own God-oriented original soul. We get bits and pieces of other beings connected with us. And so part of the clearing process is getting rid of those bits and pieces so that we can restore that original godness that is within each one of us through Scientology. After you're clear, you go through a series of levels called operating thetan levels. And thetan, T-H-E-T-A-N, that is the name for all those different gods that were created by Xenu. So the ultimate goal of the operating thetan levels is to grow more into being the God that you were originally created to be. Now, just as becoming clear takes tens of thousands of dollars, so does becoming an operating thetan at various levels. And it is said that you cannot get up into the upper levels of operating thetan without investing literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. As I mentioned, the church was founded in 1954. They created a center in England in 1959, but in 1975 moved the headquarters to Hollywood, California. They still, right there on Hollywood Boulevard, have a large, glamorous-looking headquarters, though the neighborhood's kind of seedy these days. On the side of the building, they have a big sign, or they did when I was there a few years back, proclaiming how many copies of the book Dianetics had been sold, with the number changing daily. Now, for all practical purposes, they've moved the headquarters, the operating headquarters, to Clearwater, Florida. That seems to be their main base these days. Scientology, throughout its history, has been characterized by conflict. In the early 1960s, when they were proclaiming auditing and coming to this position of being clear as sort of a medical procedure, the Food and Drug Administration swooped in and confiscated all their e-meters as untested medical devices. Well, they kind of backed down on them being medical devices, and today they're the only ones who have them. At approximately the same time, late 50s, early 60s, they had organized as a church. They had filed for tax-exempt status. The IRS denied them tax-exempt status, and then later on an appeal in the 1970s, the IRS denied them that status again. So for many years, the Church of Scientology regularly sued the IRS seeking tax-exempt status for the fees that people paid for their auditing and OT classes and other fees. Finally, in the early 1990s, the IRS relented. There happened to be many lawsuits in action against the IRS at that time. It seems that sort of a truce was declared. They gave Scientology tax-exempt status. Scientology dropped all the lawsuits. And so they were kind of re-recognized as tax-exempt from that particular time. From the earliest days, L. Ron Hubbard believed that if they could convince celebrities to be a part of Scientology, then everybody else would want to be too. So they have established what they even called celebrity centers around the world, and work very hard to attract people with recognizable names, feeling that those people will be more appealing ambassadors than simply people who kind of know the tenets of the faith. It doesn't take very many days in 2008, or very many weeks at least, before you see the name Scientology in the headlines of a tabloid or something like People or Us magazine, because of the number of celebrities who are engaged with it. Scientology recruits very aggressively on the internet, through the mail, out on the street. They attract mostly ambitious youth who really do want to have what these celebrities have. The celebrities often claim that it gives them a competitive edge in their particular profession. Scientology has a business branch called Sterling Management, or Sterling Business Systems. And it's basically Scientology principles applied to business. Today, L. Ron Hubbard, though he's been dead over 20 years, lives on as the ideal. You can walk into any Scientology center in the world and there will be a desk with a placard with his name on it. There will be yellow notepads in the center drawer with freshly sharpened pencils, ready as if he were to come in and start writing. L. Ron Hubbard wrote incredibly, prodigiously, and you cannot advance through the levels without writing much of his writings. How large are they? That's a very interesting question. They claim to have millions of members, but credible sources who try to research them have a hard time finding even as many as 100,000. Many researchers suggest that active, ongoing paid members, perhaps 50,000, but certainly many of that 50 to 100,000 are well-heeled people who are able to contribute substantial amounts of money. Current issues would include, over the last decade or so, and again, I am recording this in 2008, Tom Cruise's outbursts in various settings about how evil psychiatry and psychology are, has attracted them a lot of attention, and not necessarily complimentary attention from the greater society. There's been a great deal of controversy in the last decade over the fact that when traumatic events have taken place in American life, such as the attack on the Twin Towers in 2001 or Hurricane Katrina, that Scientology counselors rushed in to assist the victims in what critics say was just a thinly disguised attempt to recruit people into Scientology. If you do decide that you're going to sign up to work for Scientology because you can't afford the fees, the basic work contract is for 1 billion years. And if you try to get out of that, you will be sued by the organization. There have been any number of court cases, various ones of which have come down on different sides. In Europe, there is ongoing hostility directed towards Scientology, though recently Spain has acknowledged it as a legitimate religion. Germany still forbids to recognize it as a religious entity, and Belgium recently determined it to be a criminal enterprise. Scientology is very, very aggressive against their critics. They do have lawyers, they do know how to use them. They try to shut down hostile websites, and if they cannot intimidate enemies, they try to co-opt the enemies. They've taken over many blog sites, many chat rooms that have been anti-Scientology by infiltrating them and changing the whole tenor of the discussion. Scientology, incredibly interesting, incredibly big time here towards the end of the first decade of the 21st century. However, if you look at it compared to many, many other new religions, if you took away the celebrities and you took away their huge financial resources, there would be an extremely marginal and largely insignificant group. So Scientology in the news today, it'll be interesting to see what happens with them tomorrow.